Thank you, Senator Ossoff. Senator Warnock from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so very much, Brother Chairman, and thank all of you for your testimony. Too often in American politics, there is this false dichotomy between urban and rural, which plays into the politics of division. I don't know that we get much done in that approach. But the truth is, in my home state of Georgia, for example, public transportation not only connects people to restaurants and shops and friends and family in big cities like Atlanta, but it is also critical to opening the doors of opportunity and education and jobs in rural communities and small towns where people suffer from lack of access and mobility. In Georgia, we have transit providers in nearly 80% of 159 counties, 17 urban systems, 80 rural systems. 80 rural systems, 17 urban systems. So I think it's important that when we talk about public transportation that people recognize that it is that both urban and rural communities, small towns and big cities have a stake in that investment. The truth is we are not investing enough in public transportation, especially in rural and low-income communities. Nearly 100 of our 159 counties are considered areas of persistent poverty, and that's not including the very low-income neighborhoods in Atlanta. 159 counties, 100 of those Georgia counties considered areas of persistent poverty, lack of economic upward mobility, inextricably connected to a lack of mobility. Public transportation is not only a ticket to literal mobility, but to social mobility. Ms. Osborne, do you agree that public transportation improves mobility, equity, and quality of life in both rural and urban areas? Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. As someone who couldn't get to a job because I didn't have a car, but couldn't afford a car because I couldn't get a job, and it was moving to a community like the one I live in now that had transit that finally connected me to economic opportunity. And for people who grow up with less than me, it's even more essential.
So what should we do to support, prioritize, and improve service for people who are living in these areas that are experiencing persistent poverty, both in our cities and our rural counties and across the country? And does that start with providing funds specifically to study the issue and develop ways to strategically address it?
Absolutely. Having funding to support good planning and using the tools like the one Senator Smith pointed out that the University of Minnesota has worked on measuring access to jobs and services by all modes of travel. You do it through GIS. You can cross-reference it with areas of persistent poverty, communities of color, underserved areas, and determine where their barriers are and what service will improve it. Absolutely could unlock a big change in access to economic opportunity. And it starts with planning, and that planning will be all the more effective if there's money to actually institute that plan at the end.
So do measures like ridership, for example, sometimes stymie our efforts, or do we need a broader view of how we analyze what's actually needed in these communities? Can you speak to that?
That is an excellent question, Senator. And I think ridership was one of the best measures we had for decades. But now we have access to much better information, which is not how many people are on a bus at any given time, but how many people were able to move to jobs and to essential services. We should be measuring all modes of transportation this way. Right now, we measure whether or not vehicles move or whether or not people get on and off buses, but we really need to measure whether or not we've moved people, particularly in areas of persistent poverty, to the things that they need. And we can do it. We just haven't chosen to yet.
So in the effort then to be fiscally responsible, so that I understand clearly your answer, to be fiscally responsible, to be efficient in the deployment of public resources to address this issue. And there's a sense in which looking only at ridership is a rather crude approach rather than a smart and strategic approach to thinking about public transportation and thus mobility, both physical mobility and economic mobility.
Absolutely. It's a proxy for those legitimate outcomes you're seeking, and we can now just measure those outcomes. So we should do it.
Great. Thank you so much.